For privacy reasons, the names of individuals involved in this case have been changed. Stay tuned. A peaceful summer morning in the small town of Savona, New York, suddenly turns into an unimaginable nightmare. A 4-year-old boy goes missing on his way to summer camp, and a few hours later, his small body is found in the nearby woods, brutally murdered. The perpetrator is not a stranger or a criminal with a criminal record, but a 13-year-old boy with a young face, but an unexpected darkness. How could a child commit such a cruel crime? What made Brian Carter turn into a murderer? This case shocked America and raised terrifying questions about human nature and the dark corners of children's psychology. This book is the story of an unforgettable crime, a tragedy that has left the whole town in horror and haunting for decades, where every unsolved mystery contains secrets that want to be revealed. Step into the darkness and explore them with us. Don't hesitate to leave a like as an encouragement for us, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to update the most classic cases. Brian Carter was born on January 22, 1980, in Steuben County, New York, USA. Since he was a child, he had a rather special appearance with bright red hair, white skin, and thick glasses. Because of this different appearance, Carter often became the target of bullying at school and in the residential area where he lived. Other children not only teased him with harsh words, but also sometimes pushed him into humiliating situations, causing Carter to gradually become sullen and lonely. Carter's family said that, since he was a child, the boy showed signs of psychological instability. Carter was not good at controlling his emotions, was easily agitated, and often overreacted to stressful situations. Every time he was teased or felt offended, he could get angry, scream, smash things, and sometimes even act violently towards other children. His parents said that Carter often expressed frustration and anger, but did not know how to release it in a healthy way. Not only that, Carter also had unusual behavior. He liked to play alone, had few friends, and tended to withdraw from the world around him. Some family members thought that Carter might have a mental disorder, especially intermittent explosive disorder, IDE, but at that time, he was never officially diagnosed or received any intervention from a psychologist. Isolation and psychological trauma gradually made Carter more unstable. He often had strange behavior such as destroying toys, torturing small animals, and showing interest in violent acts. These signs could have been early warnings of what would happen later, but no one expected that Carter's suppressed anger would eventually explode in a brutal and irreparable way. On August 2, 1993, a seemingly normal summer day in the small town of Savona, New York, quickly turned into a nightmare when 4-year-old Jason Miller mysteriously disappeared. No one could have guessed that just a few hours later, he would become the victim of one of the most shocking crimes in America. And the perpetrator was a 13-year-old boy, Brian Carter. That morning, Jason Miller, a cheerful and innocent boy, left home to go to a nearby summer camp. It was a familiar routine for him, and no one in the family expected that this would be the last time they would see him alive. On the way, Jason ran into Brian Carter. Carter, then 13 years old, did not have a close relationship with Jason, but because they lived in the same area, the two boys were not complete strangers. On the surface, Carter did not seem scary or dangerous. Even with his red hair, thick glasses, and shy appearance, he could make a small child like Jason feel confident. Taking advantage of that, Carter lured Jason away from the main road, taking him to a secluded area in the nearby forest. No one knows exactly what happened in the next moments, but what is certain is that, at this place, a cruel tragedy took place. In the deserted forest, where there was only the rustling of the wind and sunlight filtering through the dense trees, no one could see what was about to happen. Brian Carter, a 13-year-old boy, suddenly changed his attitude. If, a few minutes ago, he had maintained a calm and approachable appearance, now, a fierce anger erupted in his mind. The anger that had been pent up for so long was like a volcano erupting, and he took it all out on Jason Miller's small, weak body. At first, Carter used his fists to hit Jason's head and body. The 4-year-old boy was surprised, not understanding what was happening. He screamed in pain, tears streaming down his face as he struggled to escape his attacker. But compared to Carter, he was too small and weak. The punches kept landing on Jason, stronger, more fierce, filled with anger that Carter seemed unable to control. Jason fell to the wet ground, his body shaking with fear. He begged Carter to stop, but that only made the teenager angrier. He continued to kick Jason in the chest and stomach, causing the little boy to writhe in pain. Jason's cries gradually weakened, his breathing ragged, but Carter still did not stop. As his rage reached its peak, Carter knelt down and tightened his grip on Jason's neck. The 4-year-old struggled desperately, his small hands trying to cling to the hand that was tightening around his neck, but to no avail. His eyes were filled with fear, his mouth gaping open, trying to gasp for air, but the pain was squeezing his throat, making it impossible for him to breathe. Jason's breathing slowed. His body began to convulse, his limbs clawing at nothing. After a moment, the boy was completely still. Carter looked down at Jason, stopping for a moment, watching to see if the boy was dead. But something made Carter unhappy. Seeing that Jason was still showing signs of life, Carter decided to end it all. He looked around and picked up a large, rough, sharp-edged rock from the ground. Without hesitation, Carter raised the rock high and threw it hard at Jason's head. The thud sound echoed dryly in the quiet forest. But Carter was not done yet. He picked up the rock again, then continued to smash it down on the motionless boy's head. Each blow was an outburst of anger, a release of the inhibitions that Carter had accumulated over the years. Blood gushed from the wound on Jason's head, spreading to the ground, soaking into the rotten leaves below. His face was now unrecognizable. The 4-year-old boy was completely motionless. Carter stopped, breathing heavily. But that was not enough. Carter's agitation had not completely subsided. He sat down, staring at Jason's body, as if thinking about something. Then he picked up a sharp branch from the ground and used it to poke the boy's body. No one knows exactly what Carter did at that moment. But the scene later showed that he had arranged Jason's body in a strange way, as if he was trying to create his own mark. The wounds on Jason's body were not just the result of killing. They also reflected a distortion in Carter's psyche, some urge that made him want to have complete control over his victim, even after the boy was dead. After feeling that he had accomplished everything he wanted, Carter stood up and brushed the dirt off his clothes. He looked around once more, making sure that no one was watching, and calmly left the scene. On the way home, Carter showed no signs of panic or fear. He walked slowly, as if nothing had happened. When he got home, he changed his clothes, washed the dirt off his hands, and continued his daily activities as usual. No one in his family noticed anything unusual. No one could have imagined that just minutes before, Carter had murdered an innocent child in the most brutal way. But Carter did not know that, no matter how hard he tried to hide his crime, the truth would sooner or later be revealed. And then just 24 hours later, the police came to him with questions he could not avoid. That afternoon, when Jason Miller did not return to camp as usual, his family began to worry. At first, they thought he was just playing somewhere and would return soon. But as the sun began to set behind the trees, their worry quickly turned to panic. Jason was a good boy who had never gone off on his own or been absent for long periods of time without notice. His family immediately split up to search for him, calling his name along the streets and in the areas he frequented. But Jason had disappeared without a trace. No one in the family could find him. They called friends, neighbors, and people at the camp, but no one had seen him since noon. When it was completely dark and Jason still had not appeared, his parents panicked and called the police. Immediately after receiving the news of Jason's disappearance, the local police immediately launched a large-scale search. They mobilized rescue forces, police dogs, and even volunteers from the town to participate. People and police scoured the areas around the summer camp, from empty lots to small streams to dense bushes in the woods. That night, no one slept. Flashlights scanned every bush. Jason's name echoed in the quiet night. But all was in vain. The 4-year-old boy seemed to have disappeared into thin air. It was not until the next morning, when the sunlight gradually dispelled the fog in the forest, that a volunteer discovered something unusual. In a remote area, about a mile from the summer camp, this person saw drag marks on the ground and dried bloodstains on the leaves. As they drew closer, they were shocked to see a horrifying sight. The tiny body of Jason Miller lying motionless in the middle of the vacant lot in a hauntingly bizarre position. The police quickly cordoned off the scene. They knew they were dealing with a gruesome murder. Jason's body had been brutally beaten. His head, had many serious injuries. His skull was broken by a hard object. His face was almost completely intact. But what was even more terrifying was what the killer did after the boy died. Investigators discovered that Jason's body had been arranged in a strange way. There were puncture marks on his skin from a sharp object, as if the killer had used a stick or a sharp object to stab the boy's body. These details showed that this was not simply a murder, but an act of violence stemming from a deep psychological disorder. Traces around the scene also showed that the attack did not happen in a flash. Jason had been tortured for a period of time before he was killed. The signs of struggle, the bruises on his body, all indicated that he had tried to resist in desperation. As soon as the body was discovered, the police immediately opened an investigation. Based on the time of disappearance and the location of the crime scene, they determined that the perpetrator was most likely someone who lived in the area, or at least knew Jason. They began questioning people at the camp, Jason's friends, and those who had last seen him. Very quickly, one name began to appear repeatedly in the witness statements. Brian Carter, a 13-year-old boy who lived near the woods and had been seen with Jason at noon the day of the crime. The police went to Carter for questioning. When asked about Jason, he appeared calm and said that he had not seen the boy that day. However, Carter's testimony was inconsistent with that of the other witnesses. Not long after, the results of the forensic examination revealed an important detail. Some small fibers found on Jason's body matched the material of Carter's shirt that day. At this point, Carter began to show signs of abnormality. As the police interrogated him further, he became confused, sweaty, and unable to maintain his composure, as he had at first. Finally, after hours of interrogation, Carter broke down. He bowed his head and remained silent for a long time before uttering a confession that sent shivers down the entire town's spine.
I killed Jason.
Carter's confession shocked everyone. No one could believe that a 13-year-old could kill a 4-year-old boy in such a brutal way. When asked about his motive, Carter said that he had no specific reason. He just felt like doing it and could not control himself. This prompted psychologists to step in to analyze Carter's psychology further. The case quickly became a topic of controversy, not only locally, but also across the United States. How could a 13-year-old become such a brutal killer? Psychologists believe that Carter may have shown signs of behavioral disorders that went undetected. He may have suffered from social isolation, bullying at school, or deep psychological trauma that led to his violent behavior. Big questions began to arise. Should a 13-year-old be tried as an adult? How can we detect danger signs in children early? What responsibility do the education system and families have to prevent tragedies like this? Brian Carter was charged with second-degree murder, a serious crime, even though he was only 13 years old at the time of the crime. Because of the particularly brutal nature of the crime, prosecutors decided to try Carter as an adult rather than sending him to juvenile court. This decision caused much controversy, with some arguing that a child of his age could not fully understand the consequences of his actions, while others believed that what Carter had done was too terrible to warrant leniency. Carter's trial took place in 1994 and attracted a great deal of press and public attention across the United States. Throughout the proceedings, prosecutors presented evidence that Carter not only had a motive for the crime, but that he had done it deliberately, not on a whim. Testimonies, evidence at the crime scene, and Carter's own confession paint a horrifying picture of the psyche of the 13-year-old. The jury eventually returned a guilty verdict, and Carter was sentenced to 9 years to life in prison with the possibility of parole every few years. The sentence once again divided public opinion. Some believed that Carter was still young and could be rehabilitated, while the victim's family and many others argued that the sentence was not enough to punish such a terrible crime. Throughout his years in prison, Carter repeatedly expressed remorse for his actions. He participated in rehabilitation programs, completed a prison education course, and repeatedly wrote letters of apology to the victim's family, expressing his desire for forgiveness and a chance to start his life over. Every few years, he was brought before the parole board to ask for parole, hoping to be released early. However, each time Carter applied for parole, Jason Miller's family showed up to the hearing to protest. They believed that the pain Carter had caused was too great, and they could not accept that the man who had brutally murdered their son would be allowed to walk free. They often brought pictures of Jason, recounted memories of him, and emphasized that their family had not yet overcome the loss. To them, Carter would forever be the man who took their son's life, and that letting him out of prison would be an injustice to Jason. Despite Carter's efforts to show remorse, his parole applications were repeatedly denied. Each time, the debate about whether a child who committed a serious crime should be locked up for life was renewed. Some psychologists and defense attorneys argued that Carter committed the crime at too young an age and that he deserved a chance to prove that he had changed. On the contrary, Jason's family and many others believe that a murderer, regardless of age, should be held accountable for his actions for life. After being denied parole several times, in 2021, Brian Carter was approved for parole after nearly 28 years in prison. On February 17, 2022, Carter was officially released and reintegrated into the community under strict probation conditions. The case of Brian Carter is a heartbreaking tragedy that not only took the life of an innocent boy, but also destroyed the life of a lost teenager. It raises troubling questions about human nature, about society's responsibility to children who show signs of mental instability, and about how the justice system should treat juvenile offenders. Was Carter truly a natural-born monster, or was he simply the product of a damaged childhood that society failed to recognize and intervene in? Could this crime have been prevented if help had been provided earlier? And most importantly, how should justice be defined in cases like this? We often talk about punishment for crime, but is there room for redemption and forgiveness? Does a person who commits a crime as a child deserve a chance to turn their life around? Or should they suffer the consequences for the rest of their lives to ensure justice for the victim? This case is not only a story of two people, but also a warning to the whole society that the responsibility to protect children does not stop at punishing the perpetrator, but also in preventing similar tragedies from happening in the future. So, what can we do to protect children from becoming both victims and perpetrators? Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this story and want to dive deeper into more intriguing mysteries, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.